Okay, y'all. I was watching this and I was just so appalled that I had to share it with you. Check it out. Citation. This is taken from YouTube. Pan-Africanism in today's world.
And then the second part of today's Pan Africanism is Africans on the continent connecting with African Americans here, right? And Malcolm X was sort of one of the leaders of that, way ahead of his time, even before we had the internet and social media to be able to connect the dots. When I first moved to this country from Ethiopia in 1994 in Mississippi, African Americans and Africans had such stereotypical stories about each other, right? So the people who are native to Mississippi would say all kinds of things to me about what they thought being Africa meant. We were coming out of the 80s famine in Ethiopia, which the West very much had a lot to do with, as we've all come to learn. So they saw us as being just inherently poor and coming out of a war. And then the other side of that too is African immigrants, because of the media that is shared, the Western media that's shared in Ethiopia, had this stereotypical view of African Americans as being either doctors and lawyers like the Cosbys, because which ran there, or being criminals, because cops ran there too, right? So we come here to
Sound
meet
familiar?
people who have a lot more in common than not, and we both have this really warped view of each other. So Africans and African Americans, I'd say, new African Americans and
It's a
Native African
reason
Americans
why
have
that
to have
is.
that understanding. That's the second
They
part of Pan
want us to be
Africanism. I mean,
divided.
there's no sense in fighting for Black Lives Matter here, but then when you look at the story out of Ethiopia, you're on the side of armed insurgents because you're reading CNN, right? Thank you. That to me is one of the
Message.
most frustrating things about good, ordinary people that believe they're on the side of social justice and they get it right on one hand and they're literally on the side of the oppressor on the other. And I have empathy for it because mainstream media does a really good job of making it seem like they're really on the side of the oppressed. But I think we're all smart enough to be able to start to dissect it in this day and age where you've got places like Breakthrough News that you can rely on. Shout out to Breakthrough News. Truly, I mean, it's one of the places that I suggest. Black Agenda Reports, well done. And Gray Zone does a pretty good job too. I know they cover a lot of Latin America, but they also do cover Africa. So that's more media, the better. The more independent media, the better. I do genuinely still believe in journalism. When it's done right, it can literally change the world and rift divides. But we need to have more outlets that are doing it right, as opposed to all of these just kind of false organizations. The third part of today's Pan Africanism is connecting all exploited people to each other, right? And recognizing that our struggles are connected in what's going on in Ethiopia, what's going on in Latin America. We've got the Summit of the Americas happening right now. If we had the Summit of Africa, the same formula would be used. They would use these sort of, ethno-fascist, greedy elite people coming out of Ethiopia saying they represent Ethiopia when they represent maybe a sliver, maybe 2% of the population, and
Sound
they would call it
familiar?
Summit of the Africas. They would take people from Rwanda and the
Same thing
DRC
going
that
on in
represent the
America.
elite, that represent the group of people that are oppressing, and they would say we're having Summit of the Africas, right? So it's really some of the same tools that are used, the same tools of exploitation, and story is a big part of it. Actual military presence that Eugene referred to, as well as Kambale referred to. We have U.S. military in the Horn of Africa, as well as in most African countries. The only one I know of for sure that doesn't have it is Eritrea, which is a small African country north of Ethiopia you rarely hear about. I would argue they're the Cuba of Africa. They have resisted imperialism for nearly 30 years.
Praise the Lord for them.
And because of that, the West hates them, right? They are a bad example of what can happen when the people are united, when they understand the game that's played between them. And so they're not shaky about They don't shake depending on what story comes out of the outlets or what story comes out of Amnesty or Human Rights Watch. They're very, very clear. Or the UN, for that matter. Aid agencies have played a huge role in fueling the conflict in Ethiopia. They keep talking about, wanting to give aid to this terrorist group's region, but there's suspicions that through that
Message.
aid, there are weapons that are going in, right? And
Message.
something we know are confirmed to be true is UN trucks, UN humanitarian aid trucks, are actually being used by this armed insurgent group to go through different borders and kill civilians.
Say what?
This is the United Nations, right? It's that understand.
Say what? They doing what? I can't believe that. But I can believe it. Yeah. Our worst fears have come true. The things that we theorized them doing, they're doing. And it's a lot more that's hidden that isn't being caught on tape or camera these days. Anyway, let's finish listening to this nonsense that's going on in the world, because they do try to make it seem like America